guys? Thanks so much for clicking on my channel. Well, all smiles over here. I am Will Sanja. It's like asking a question. Will Sanja help you keep a smile for today? And hopefully the answer is yes, you guys. I'm trying not to keep it long, but y'all already know. If it gets good, I'm going to keep on talking. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to go to next. Today is when you are sure you will indeed possess the land. But the reason why you haven't conquered it yet, whatever that it is in your life, is because you have not been sure. And being sure just means to understand that you have been given authority to conquer, authority to victory, okay? Which means what? You got to understand that God has given you power over all the power of the enemy. And by no means shall it what? Harm you. The thing is, you have been looking at that situation that's been staring you in the face, whether it's sickness, whether it's you're not having enough money, whether your marriage is on the rocks, whether your kid's been disobedient, whether somebody's in jail, whether somebody's on drugs, whatever it is, you've been looking at that situation like it's bigger than you. And because you think it's bigger than you, automatically you think it's bigger than God. And God has said, ain't nothing bigger than me, because greater is me that is within you than anything that is in this world. I have given you the authority to handle this. Be sure in who you are within me. Then you can conquer and devour and what? Possess the land. Enter into your promised land. But because you're not sure, you don't understand that God has already prepared you for this. He's already prepared you for victory. You don't believe it? Go back to David. Remember, David was in his father's backyard tending to the sheep. And while tending to the sheep, he ended up having to do what? Slay some what? Lions and slay some bears. But you know what? Every time the people would see David, they didn't see him slaying lions. They didn't even see him slaying bears. Just when they saw him, they would just see him picking up the poop of the sheep. They will see him brushing the sheep. They will see him shearing the sheep. They will see him what? Taming the sheep. But they never saw him what? Slaying the lion or slaying the bear. But David knew what he had done, and that was God preparing David. And when the opportune time came to where he was able to use what God has already prepared him to do, be, and have, when that time came, David said, choose me. And it was talking about what? Goliath. They were trying to say who was going to go up to Goliath, because Goliath said, whoever defeats me, then what? You will win, and we will be your servants. We will be your slaves, in other words, right? And no soldiers out there were saying, I'll go. All of them were saying, we ain't qualified for this. Do you know what Goliath do to the people that he conquered? Have you seen him in action? So all the soldiers was like, no, not me. But so happens that David was there that particular day, and he overheard them talking about who's going to defeat Goliath. And that preparation rose up in David. In other words, he was sure of who he was by the authority that God gave in him through his preparation. David said, hey, what you say you'll get if you defeat Goliath? And they said, oh, your household will be blessed. You won't have no more bills. We'll pay off your mortgage and all this other stuff. And David said, I'll do it. They said, you're just a little lad. His brother was saying, go back, David, and tend to the sheep. This is grown folks' business. This is for soldiers. And David said, I've been in the back, slaying lions and bears. And so David said, I can do it. I can do it. And what happened? Saul said, what? All right, suit him up. They started to suit David up in their armor. And David said, I can't hardly move in this armor. I need to take this off. Why? Because people, even though you tell them that you can do it, when you're sure in yourself, and this is a tip for you, when you're sure in yourself, there's going to be some people around you that want you to wear their armor, because they think the only way you can possess the land, the only way you can win, the only way you can get through this is if you wear what they think they will have to wear to conquer it. Which means they'll say you need a bachelor's degree, you need a doctorate degree, you need a master's degree, you need experience in this, you need this, that, and the other, you need a good resume, they'll tell you all this stuff. And God is saying, no, you don't. And that's what David said. David said, I can't fight in this. I got to fight the way I know how. Which means what? through the preparation that God gave him when he was slaying the lions, the tigers, and bears. See, you and like me, we have slayed some lions and bears. We've had some trials and tribulations that nobody else has seen. And see, when people don't see the victories, the silent victories, the victories that God hide from them, when people don't know that you've already conquered some things in your life through trials and tribulations, they'll just automatically assume that you're weak. They'll automatically assume that you need some assistance. They'll automatically assume that you need some help. But listen, God said you don't need their help. You don't need their armor. You don't need their advice. You don't need their tips. You just need to walk in the authority that he has given unto you. And that's what God is saying. He has already prepared you for this. And that preparedness gave you the authority. And with that authority comes with you being sure of who you are. And when you know who you are, that's you being sure. And then you can step and walk high step in authority, high step in being sure. And then you'll conquer the land, because that's exactly what David did. When David went out with what he was working with, what God had prepared him to do, be and have, he went out there with just some smooth pebbles and a slingshot. That's all he needed. That was all he needed. And when he killed Goliath, when Goliath hit the ground, David said, I want to take his head off to make sure that you ain't going to ever torture nobody else again. Even though he was dead, he wanted to make sure. See, that sureness count. And so David didn't have his own sword. But you know what he did? He used the sword of Goliath. Okay, you hear me? Are you hearing me? He used the sword of Goliath to chop off Goliath's head. And that's what God will do for you. When God allow you to conquer that situation, the same thing that situation was trying to hurt you and harm you and stop you and block you with, God is going to allow you to use that same weapon that situation came up against you with to defeat it and make sure that it ain't going to ever come back at you again and nobody else. That's how God get down. That's why in Psalm 37, God says, hey, listen, I'm laughing. God said he was laughing. He's laughing because he sees the day that the enemy is coming, which means what God knows that he's about to not revenge, but give you vengeance, in other words, okay? And God goes on to say in Psalms 37 that the enemy shall fall upon his own sword and his arrows shall be broken. Not only the arrows, but also the arms, okay? And that's what God would do. And that's what God did to Goliath. He allowed David to take Goliath's sword and cut his own head off. And that is exactly what happened. And God is saying he has already prepared you. You already had your share of lions and bears. And this that is facing you now, it ain't nothing. It ain't nothing as long as God is giving you the authority, which means what? As long as God is walking with you. And how can God walk with you? God can only walk with you with his word. That's why God says to walk in the spirit. When you walk in the spirit, you will not fulfill the lust of the flesh. And when you're not fulfilling the lust of the flesh, that means you are armed. That's why God says the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, okay? They are mighty. The weapons are mighty through who? Through God. And that's what David understood. And that's what you're going to have to understand, that God has already given you the authority. So walk in your authority so that you can be sure and that you can possess everything that God has blessed you with already. You just got to be able to walk into it. You got to stop standing still, okay? When I say stop standing still, I'm not talking about you not standing still to listen to God, because God does say, be still and know that I'm God. The way you be still and know that God is by you knowing his word, okay? Now, when you no longer being still with the enemy, that means you're no longer afraid. You're sure of who you are. You understand you have authority. And God is giving you power over all the power of the enemy. Therefore, you can move forward. Move forward in all that God has called you to be doing have. God said he's wished above all things that you should prosper, be in good health, even as your soul shall prosper, which means what? There ain't nothing in your land but good, okay? God has prepared nothing but for you for good. I hope I said that right, but you know what I'm trying to say. Everything that God has for you is good and very good. God ain't called you to less than. God has not called you to sickness. God has not called you to a bomb marriage, in other words. God has not called you to a divorce. God has not called you for your kids to be on drugs. God has not called you to be on drugs. God has not called you to be an alcoholic. God has not called you to be a whore. God has not called you to be a whoremonger. God has not called you to be a meth head or crackhead. God has not called you to be obese. God has not called you, you understand? God has not called you to anything that is contrary to him. He has called you to be mighty and great. He has called you to possess the land with his authority. So know who you are. And the only way to know who you are is to know who God is within you. God said, greater is me that is within you than anything in this world. And anything that you're facing, I don't care what it is. I don't care what it look like. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. I'm telling you that God is greater. God is greater. God is greater. God is bigger. Can't nothing stand before him. Everything that comes up against God has to bow down. Everything that comes up against God has to say, you know what, God, you're right. I'm wrong. My bad. My bad, God. That's your child. My bad, God. They're not supposed to be sick. My bad, God. That's what the enemy's supposed to be saying. When you show him your authority, and your authority is the word of God. And when you show the enemy your authority, when you walk in sureness with the authority that God has given you, which is his word, then the enemy will say, my bad, God. I didn't know they was rocking out with you like that. My bad, God. I'm sorry, God. Forgive me, God. That's what the enemy will say. Because the enemy has to bow down to God. God is greater. So listen, get sure. Be sure. And start to walk in your authority. And conquer your Goliath. In other words, possess the land. Let your household be blessed. When you conquer the land, your household is blessed. Everything in you and around you that's attached to you becomes blessed. But the only way it can become blessed is to do what? It's for you to walk in authority. So walk in authority and become sure. And I'll tell you, I'm guaranteeing you. I can only guarantee you because that's what God says. God says, when you abide in him, and his word about you, then you can ask for whatever you will, and it shall be given unto you. And that's the same thing as you walking in authority, you being sure in who you are. And guess what? It will be granted to you, whatever it is. Because now your will is now God's will. And God's will for your life is a bright future. It ain't nothing but good goods and yum-yums of blessings. I hope y'all got this. I'm almost at 12 minutes, but if you didn't get it, rewind and watch again. But in the meantime, in between time, if you take just a little bit of what I'm telling you and apply to your life to the best of your ability, you won't ever have to master smile. Why? Because your smiles will always be genuine. Be blessed, stay blessed, be blessed, stay blessed, be blessed, stay blessed. Y'all know what's coming next.